All right. Neo sent us this one. I know he's probably excited. 54 minutes. This wait, this is a woman? How many subscribers is this? 22.9.
Oh, this is marvelous. Queenie got us all set up with this adorable little device, and now we can
Hey, it's British.
Dingy little place you lurk.
Hell, Lacey, it's literally hell. We've talked about this. You know what? Forget it.
This seems I like this so far.
Oh, it's nothing terribly important. Well, you know little Morningstar's pet project?
Sounds delusional to me, and I'm sick of hearing the Doomsday District screaming about it all hours of the... Why?
Well, it's just that... Well, she might be onto something.
Oh, that motherfucker! First things first, this is a spoiler-heavy review / discussion of the show. If there's a twist, I'm probably going to be talking about it. So, spoiler warning in effect from here on in.
Yeah, everyone that's watching right now has probably seen it 500 times. That's alright.
That I'm going to be talking about the show exclusively. When I say that, I mean that if it doesn't appear in the show, it doesn't exist during this video. That means I'm not going to be discussing the creator Vivzy or the behind-the-scenes drama involving the animation crew, Spindlehorse, or any of the surrounding politics / drama attached to the creation of the show. Things that are actually in the show itself, ranging from how it handles sensitive
that's what you should be doing.
Characters we can discuss.
That's what you should be doing.
Through the lens of the show itself and not the hands behind it. This is my essay video, and we're doing Death of the Author route on this one. If that's not for you, I understand. There'll be plenty of other creators talking about the behind the scenes of the show and the controversies attached to it. Seek those videos and post out instead if that's more what you're looking for. For those that are interested in taking a look at the show itself, settle in, it's gonna be a bit of a long one. Additionally, while it's not discussed too graphically in this video, all the same warnings you'd expect going into Hazbin Hotel as a show will still apply here. That includes discussions of abuse and SA. So if that content makes you uncomfortable, I'd say sit the whole fandom out, honestly. Alright, extensive disclaimer covered. We all up to speed? Good, great, let's go. Let's begin with the juiciest part of any show, the mechanics. Okay, there's a timestamp here.
My
People
favorite.
that just want to hear about the story content. I know some of you all couldn't give less of a shit about the animation and music in the show, and...
I can do this. Somehow I know it.
I hate it.
I'll get heaven behind
Oh, right.
One day I want to get Plague and
Musical.
talk to her about
How do I
this.
keep forgetting that? Well, I guess this is as good a time as any to discuss the musical element of the show. To be honest, upon first viewing, I did not care for it. The first musical number of the show really did jump scare me the first time I saw it, and I must not have gotten myself together after that point because I don't remember anything about that musical number except a vague
I don't remember
feeling of
anything about it
irritation and
either.
discomfort. As the season progressed, I was still pretty lukewarm on the song numbers. A few did catch my interest. For example, the leader of the Angel Army and Twitter's favorite character to wheel out as an example of gratuitous swearing and missing the point actually had a pretty good impact on the first episode's second song. Because, yeah, there's 2 songs per episode in this, which, I gotta admit, is way more than I was expecting. And they never really lose that jump scare energy. For the most part, the songs
Jump
begin
scare
abruptly
energy?
with
Who's
no real
naming a
lead.
jump scare
Essential
energy?
All of them, of course. Fox and Alistair's bitching at one another via lyrical combat has a pretty long lead-in and is one of the better handled musical numbers. But songs like Happy Day in Hell
Sip
and
coffee.
Respect hit you a bit
Shout
late.
out here.
Oh,
Oh, wait. I love shoutouts. Here we go, here we go, here we go. I like Stardew Valley.
And the prison.
What? Wait. Is it a coffee tuber?
I hate you.
That's pretty funny. That's actually really funny. I like that a lot.
Indication of intent that I cannot
Welcome in,
for the life of
coffee.
me figure out if this is intentionally meant to be jarring or if there's just no effort put into the setup of some of these. Okay, but my bitch baby whining aside about setup and placement of the songs, are they any good? Well, sorta. Like I said, on my first
It's a
viewing,
mix.
I did not care for most of the musical asides. They felt a bit dry.
I only
to me
like
and
3
like they were
songs.
retreading what we already knew, but via musical instead of exposition. See, the purpose of a musical number, at least in my humble,
I genuinely
not
only
PhD
like
owning
3 of the
opinion,
songs. I'm
should
gonna
be
be
to
honest
provide an
with you.
insight to a character we otherwise wouldn't have, deliver information we wouldn't have, or otherwise moving the plot forward. Some of you are probably already groaning into your hands, knowing exactly what I'm about to wheel out as an example of a musical done right.
What is this?
Every single night, the same arrangement. I go out and fight the fight.
That's Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Yes, I'm not joking.
I've never
Fuck
seen...
people in
I gotta
movies
watch
on
Buffy the
display.
Vampire
This is
Slayer.
how
I've
you
never
know
seen
that
it
Buffy
yet.
the Vampire Slayer had a musical episode and it was fantastic. So you want to look at things like Buffy to see how musical numbers can be both
I still haven't
character
seen it.
and
Someone gotta tell me if
crucial
it's
and
good.
still just be good standalone songs.
I cannot believe
so
it.
far, none of the musical numbers in Hazbin have been the sort of thing that I would listen to independent of the show. It's almost like the opposite effect of what Steven Universe has on me. I will just never sit through all of Steven Universe. I simply won't. But the musical numbers in that seem to have more staying power.
Well, guess what? We're
even
back.
divorced from the context of their
For
show.
some reason,
in this case, it could be a matter of just quantity over
I don't know. Like, popped up. What are you doing? Did you break? Did I pause the video? We have an uh-oh moment.
Quality. Unfortunately, for season 1, the musical numbers so far have been serviceable but not particularly memorable. However, with that said, when episode 6 dropped, that was the one that grabbed me by my cynical throat and demanded I pay attention. The song You Didn't Know hits all the right marks for me. It progresses the story, gives characters insight on
it's
some
not
of the
that
other
good. I don't think so. Dude. Not working.
Evolve, changes their outlooks and relationships from one another, and on top of it, it's just a bit of a bop. Episode 6 was actually
This is our life now. Our life is buffering.
where I started paying attention to the show again in all aspects. There's still plenty of issues, and trust you me, we'll get to them, but the exploration...
There ain't nothing I can do.
of heaven and its sheer ignorance was just curious enough to get me on board, and the musical numbers sold it for me. Episode 6 is why this review even exists, because it gave me just enough
I didn't
to
like,
care about...
I mean, it's fine. Episode 6 is fine. Like, it's not my favorite thing in the world, but it's fine. Our internet is just absolutely in the crapper today. Does my internet just don't have a seizure? Video's just not gonna work.
The show kind of stuck the landing. It stumbled a little,
okay,
sure, but it's still standing, and season 2 has a rather solid foundational setup, which the first season seemed to struggle with. The music over the final 2 episodes follows the same trend as the others in that they're not overly memorable, but they all serve their purpose well enough. And while they're not as memorable
I
as
like how there's a
Gone,
background.
Lose a Baby, or You Didn't Know, they're arguably just as good at getting across new information to the audience. They kind of came into their own towards the end of the season, and I was really glad to see the musical numbers sort of, I can't believe I'm about to say this, but they kind of found their groove. Oh,
no, they
God.
didn't.
I'm so old. Specifically, the final number of the show does a lot for the setup of season 2 in terms of antagonists, and I'd consider that a win. And after watching the show through twice, I have to admit that the songs are growing on me a bit. I don't think telling someone they need to listen to a song 3 times to really give it a chance is a good standard for these things, but at least for me, 3 times seems to do the trick. Overall, the musical element of the show, I'd give an arbitrary number of like 6 out of 10, if numbers tell you anything, which they shouldn't. Okay, so we've covered the music, so it only makes sense to turn to the visuals next. Some people really hate these designs, and there's a myriad of reasons for that, ranging from the claim that they're too cluttered or busy, or that they're too samey, which is kind of just hilariously wrong.
They're fine in my opinion. They're just alright. Like, they're not the best. Let's be honest here. But there's so much going on that it kind of takes away from the show.
As for the first complaint about designs being too busy and garish, I do actually agree with this one. Some of the characters aren't too bad. Vaggie, Charlie, and Alistair are okay, but even they're zooming into just too much when it comes to animation. But characters like Angel Dust, Husk, and Sir Pretentious are just so much. Sir Pretentious is the worst. I'm now sitting here wondering if I'm saying that right. I'm not changing it.
Angel Dust is fine.
So Snake Boy is probably the best and worst example of this. His highlight color is used so much on his design that becomes a messy blend where the parts that should pop, like the inside of his hair, just get lost into the lines of his suit. I can only imagine how much of an animation nightmare some of these designs were to work with. Now, that's not to say that the designs are impossible to work with. They're not. Case in point, the show exists. Being worked with, but I still think a lot of these designs just have far too much going on. And that's coming from someone that can't simplify or unify a design to save her fucking life. Despite my nitpicks, I don't loathe the look of these characters. It's just that if I had been brought the designs for review, I would have told the artist to work on making them look a bit less muddled. Also, there was nowhere good to put this in my script, so I'm just going to shove it on in here. I adore Baggie's hair so much, it activates my serotonin. And of course, Nifty is just perfect.
Your serotonin?
As for the claim that the characters are too samey, I mean, no, just look at them with your eyes, please, I beg. Stop, wait, don't look at those two. Okay. I think that this claim is actually specifically...
They all have the suit, that's the problem.
During the quote-unquote attractive males of the show. In that sense, yes, there is a trend of tall, pointy Tumblr sexy men. This is most strongly highlighted with Alistair and Lucifer's designs.
Pointy, sexy men.
Have a lot in common. I think it's a bit of a cherry-picked example to pretend that this is a show-spanning problem as opposed to a couple of characters that share these traits. A lot of the time, I hear this complaint and it does reek of bad faith or a personal distaste for the sexy men trope. So it's a little hard for me to take seriously. Naturally, this is one of those things I think is very subjective, and some people might just not be able to move past the character designs, which is fair. I can't get past South Park style, for example, but that's just me, and I know it doesn't bother a lot of people, so, you know, end of day, shrug. However, I won't lie and say that I'm not really disappointed with the lack of melanin in this cast. But I also hate Family Guy, so let's be honest here. This show has a host of different heritages and nationalities for its characters. What I mean when I complain about the Pale Parade is that even characters who are canonically people of color tend to be really washed out in their designs. I wouldn't know that Nifty was meant to be Japanese.
Who gives a rat's balls
about it on Twitter. Same goes for Alistair being mixed raced. Yet, with that in mind, I also think that this complaint runs the risk of very, very quickly spiraling into the expectation of people of all nationalities being only depicted in one quote-unquote correct way.
Stuttering.
And that any deviation from that is either an act of bigotry or a failure of some sort. And, okay, I'm going to try and succinctly explain to you why this is a problem.
Dying internet.
Problem using a real world example. Growing up, I had a mate, and for all those confused, I'm Aussie by the way.
Welcome to... Nice job being Aussie. Alright. We're gonna give it a minute. See if it stops freaking out. Don't know what's going on. Someone's screwing with the internet. videos.
Who is a stereotypical looking Irish chick. Pale as a ghost, freckled with fiery red hair. And let me tell you, there was not a curl to be seen in that hair. It was dead straight. Anyone glancing at her would make assumptions as to what her heritage was, but she's actually of Aboriginal descent. And again,
someone broke the internet.
I'm aware some of you are from America or UK or elsewhere and don't immediately know what I mean by that. Aboriginals in Australia are our First Nations people, the
Don't understand what's going on. Having it be really slow. It is really slow. We're just gonna sit here.
natives that got here before the British decided to say, hey, is anyone living here? And then did not wait for an answer. My friend just so happened to have a father who had been Irish, and her mother had been a First Nations woman. She was always deeply involved with her heritage, and
Is this gonna be our life? We just gotta wait it out. I have no idea what's going on. I've never had this problem
undeniably an
before.
Aboriginal, but you wouldn't know it by looking at her. If she was drawn into a show like Hazbin, well, I can only imagine the outrage of depicting a mixed-race person of color as a pale redhead. But that is literally who she is. She exists. My point in this is that people aren't their stereotypes. People don't suddenly become not a person of color because their hair is straight or their shades lighter than what the Caucasian crowd is envisioning. So with that in mind, I am a little sad about how pale the main crew is, yes, but I don't think it's fair to outright demand that all our depictions of people of color fit a specific mold. That, in and of itself, becomes an act of exclusion and policing who is and is not included in their own nationality based on appearance.
Do you know how much I care about this?
I don't think I need to explain.
Zero.
This is, yikes. Alright, I've already spoken too much about a topic that is not my wheelhouse, so let's return to something I have a bit more of a stake in. So, what about the animation of the show? It's good.
I don't think anyone gives a rat's balls about that topic.
Fine, I'll talk about the animation errors a bit too, God. First, let me begin by saying that Hazbin is at its worst with over-editing, poor transitions, and mistakes in the first episode. Even more notoriously within the first musical number.
The animation's alright
really
because it's like they
how
tried their
this
best.
Transition between animators is. And once you pay attention to how uncoordinated and frantic the camera movement is during Happy Day in Hell, you just cannot unsee it. I don't want to go into a full breakdown on the faults of this sequence. They're numerous and seem born out of a lack of faith in the base animation and the attention span of the audience, but if you're looking for an overall discussion as to why this doesn't work, I'll direct you to a video by Sarcastic Chorus. He goes over everything I would have said and then some, so add it to your watch list. Instead, I'd like to talk a bit about the idea of visual mistakes and continuity errors in animation in Hazbin Hotel and indeed all media. After a rough start of episode 1, I spent my second and third viewing of the show looking for any outstanding examples of this same problem, and I found myself pleasantly surprised to find that it just did not make a reoccurrence. And honestly, even shows that I adored a little bits and pieces have moments like this. Invincible, for a recent example, has really glaring animation issues sometimes that make me want to rip my fucking hair out. See this? No? Let me zoom in for you. Whoever colored these frames didn't have their settings set correctly, and you can see the gap between the line art and the color fill.
No one cares.
The only reason I notice this and it bothers me so much is because I'm guilty of this exact same thing in my own work. And thanks, I hate it. What I'm saying is, these things can happen, and indeed do happen, very regularly. Even the most polished product is bound to have little bits and pieces slip through the cracks. Productions do their best to minimize these errors, but there's only so much quality control can do when you're working in a large production like these. And honestly, most of the time, it only becomes noticeable when you're looking for it, and at that point, it's just add a CinemaSins ding. So long as it's not a consistent or obvious experience-breaking error, then it's not worth more than an observation note. And I can comfortably say that most of Hazbin Hotel looks absolutely stunning. The light in this show is just gorgeous, and a lot of the style and look of it is carried by these backgrounds. It's actually kind of hard for me to sit down and talk about how good this show looks without just saying, look at it! It's practically glowing! I love this! As far as the animation goes, Hazbin has one of the best looks and lighting that I've seen in a long time. And yes,
I'm gonna be honest.
But fuck you, you clicked on my video.
It's slightly cringed out, but I think
some of the animation coming out recently, like Invincible, it's pretty stock standard when it comes to stylization.
She's at least proud of it, which makes it a little bit better.
Bombastic moments like Rick and Morty has majority of the show in a fairly standard style, whereas Hazbin is consistently bathed in warm, deep hues that make the worms in my brain go brr. This is less an analysis and just me saying how much I like the look of the show. Happy Day in Hell is where you're gonna find the worst it has to offer, and fortunately it doesn't dip that low again. Shame that it's the first foot forward, but overall I'd give the animation and color work a solid 8 to 9 out of 10. That is if you really need a numerical breakdown like that means anything. And now that we're almost halfway through this video, let's actually talk about, you know, the premise of the show. What if sinners tried to redeem themselves and get into heaven? That right there
I'm gonna be honest, I'm looking at an animation, I don't really care what it looks like.
The show carries on from the pilot that aired some 4 years earlier, and while most fans are going to be familiar with it, I can see this becoming an awkward starting point for future viewers. After all, the pilot isn't included in the actual show, so it's tenuously canon. On one hand, I'm pleased that we didn't have to spend time retreading old ground by rehashing the pilot, but also, a pilot isn't supposed to be the first episode.
That's not true. That's not true. The first episode is the pilot, in almost every series.
This is less a Hazbin Hotel problem and more an indie animation problem as of late. Pilot episodes are increasingly being used as less a proof of concept to pick up a show, and instead a tentative first episode that, if it goes over well, will become the first episode. But of course, I've already complained a little bit about the mechanics of the show, so I won't harp on this for too long. This is just Mally's pet peeve. Please stop making pilots the first episode, I'm begging. Let's get back to the actual story. So Charlie Morningstar, the Princess of Hell and daughter of the first fallen angel Lucifer and the first woman Lilith, has a dream. Charlie is very Disney princess coded, and add that idea to being in literal hell and it's a musical, it's hilarious, I'm not gonna lie, that's funny as hell. The show has two really strong premises going for it right off the bat, and the idea of trying to redeem sinners to get them into heaven. Except, there's one teeny tiny little hitch in that none of the sinners seem particularly interested in the whole redemption thing. In the show, this is presented as a mixture of defeatism and disinterest from the residents of hell. No one takes Charlie seriously, and they take the Happy Hotel, later renamed to Hazbin Hotel because Alistair is a prick, even less seriously. Speaking of the aforementioned prick, there's the staff of the hotel to consider. They believe in the idea about as much as the general public of hell does. In the beginning of the story, the group that makes up the staff of the hotel is, to put it lightly, held together by glue and abusive power structures. We'll get to it later. Alistair is there for mysterious purposes, but under the claim he's essentially using them for his own personal suffering factory as the sinners try and fail to improve themselves. Along with him, he brings Husk and Nifty by virtue of having them on his payroll. That's in giant quotation marks, by the way. They don't have much of a choice in the whole thing and barely even seem interested in the purpose of the hotel. They are literally just there because Alistair said they had to be. Then there's Angel Dust, the hotel's first guest, and he's there in order to stay somewhere rent-free to avoid an abusive creep that owns his soul. Angel is rather upfront about that and makes no real effort to sell the idea that he even wants to change when he first joins the crew. And then finally there's Vaggie. At a glance she seems like she might genuinely believe in the hotel, but it's made explicitly clear throughout the show that Vaggie, more than the others, has absolutely no reason to hope that this hotel will work. Especially given her own experiences with the ruthlessness of heaven and the unforgiving nature of the place she was created in. Vaggie just doesn't believe in the hotel, but she does believe in Charlie.
How do you cut someone's eye out like that?
Less faith in her partner being able to do the impossible, and more faith that Charlie will do good no matter what form that takes. Even if ultimately the hotel fails, Vaggie seems to know that Charlie herself can have a positive impact on sinners, even if that means they can't get into heaven. So at the end of the day, the only person who actually believes in the hotel to begin with is Charlie herself. and even she's very forced to quickly rearrange her priorities once the plot kicks in, which it does very quickly. Okay, with the basic premise covered, I have a confession to make. As I was writing this script, the thought of going into detail on the events of the show from A to B made me acutely exhausted, which is not a very
It makes
encouraging
anyone
sign,
exhausted.
I realize, but please bear with me. See,
I've
I was
listened to a
torn
lot of
between the
videos
sensation
like
of
that.
having a lot to talk about and paradoxically nothing at all. I don't particularly want to sit here and recap everything that happens throughout the 8 episodes,
Yeah,
but it effectively
most
boils down to
most
nothing I find
YouTubers do that.
interesting. That's kind of the experience with Hazbin Hotel in a nutshell. A lot happens very quickly, and at the end of it, it kind of feels as though nothing was really achieved. Let me instead only discuss things I actually care about in the show, rather than giving you a play-by-play recap. I mean, realistically, you've already watched the show or heard other people retread its details ad nauseum, and for those rare few of you that haven't experienced either of those things, all you need to know is that Heaven is willfully oblivious, Alistair is mysterious spooky man, Vaggie is a fallen angel, this woman killed an angel which kickstarts the entire plot, but somehow she only gets 2 seconds on screen, these guys are a delight and we hate them, there's not a single emotionally undamaged character within the cast, and daddy issues in the Hazbin universe are the expectation by default. Alright, with that covered, here are the things
They're
that
spending a
do
lot of
interest me
effort
about
into
Hazbin's
this
characters and
scene.
story. Beginning with the Disney princess of hell herself, Charlie. As a character,
I've been
Charlie can be
told
rather
that she
difficult for
relates
some
to
viewers.
Disney a lot.
She straddles the line of endearing to outright annoying with a pretty poor balance, and she often tips over into almost unforgivably oopsies I'm just a silly guy territory. Despite occasionally crossing the line into aggravating, Charlie does remain the central heart of the show. It's unsurprising given she's the most open to other characters and supporting them even when they lack faith in themselves. However, none of that interests me very much. We've seen the good-intentioned, if sometimes misguided hero a million times over. What interests me with Charlie is her inherent privilege. Unlike most of the cast, and indeed the entirety of Hell, Charlie is uniquely untouchable in her position. Unlike the other sinners, she doesn't have to fear being killed or exterminated, and she's above most problems as the Princess of Hell. In some respects, that almost makes her uniquely qualified for the mission that she's undertaking. With no cap on money and security, she can safely and confidently navigate through Hell and setting up a hotel. However, by that same virtue, she's also decidedly disconnected from the people she's attempting to help. Charlie has never experienced being a sinner, let alone a human. She's never experienced the same hardships that someone like Angel Dust did in life and then again in death. She's never been in the position where she's had to fear for her life or power to the point that she's forced to give up her soul to a more powerful entity like Husk had to. In short, Charlie is an ally, but she has no real understanding of the struggle, and it shows in some of her unintentionally callous or demeaning behaviors. Again, showcased at its worst in this fucking scene, which almost made me quit. I had hoped with the early mention of Lucifer getting a pardon for the demons in Hell that the show would discuss this privileged stance Charlie is coming from, but it became pretty clear the line was there as a means of exposition.
Who cares? I don't care about that. I don't care if she's privileged or not. That's not the point of the show for me. I don't give a rat's left nut. I don't give... If it was... Dude, if it was like a squirrel coming down, the squirrel would be shot. That's how much I wouldn't care.
Rather than setting up a potential divide between Charlie and the residents of the hotel. It is a difficult topic to discuss, I'll grant it that. Even writing the script, I struggle to describe the resentment that can form towards people just trying to help you when they're not like you. Those insulated from oppression that they're actively trying to help fight can sometimes appear condescending or like they're playing house, because at the end of the day, they risk nothing. Realistically speaking, if Charlie's hotel fell apart tomorrow, she would be financially, socially, and physically no worse for it. But the sinners housed within would be lambs to the slaughter. Literally. I actually watched The Drover's Wife recently, and it had a pretty perfect summary of how this sort of thing feels.
I'm sorry.
You're right from the outside.
I was trying to give a voice to an issue that's been kept silent for far too long. Giving women the voice.
I could only hear you.
Can I hear you, Molly? Please.
No.
Let not my wrongdoing overshadow my children knowing my love for them.
Shall we start at the beginning?
It might not be fair to harbor resentment towards an ally when they are, in fact, trying their best to help and can provide assets that the marginalized group they're advocating for wouldn't have the resources to offer alone. Especially when those allies are often doing so through their own compassion and moral fiber. After all, in a way,
I hate
their
this
choice to fight
topic
when
she
they don't
decided
need
to go
is just
down.
that, a choice. people like Charlie stand to gain nothing from choosing to help, but they do so anyway because it's the right thing to do.
That's not how it works.
Charlie is kind of a saint.
It's not how it works. They're doing it out of a benefit of some kind. And, like, sure, we're talking about the show, but in real life, they're doing a tax write-off, publicity. Oh, I'm doing a good thing, so, you know, look past my misgivings. Like, this whole point is mute to me. To be honest with you, I think it's dumb.
For their empathy or desire to help others that isn't born from altruism. But in a show like Hazbin, and indeed real life to some extent, it's worth asking if that even matters. If the end result is help for those that need it, then it can be considered a net positive no matter the source of that desire. So yeah, this is a side to Charlie and the dynamic in the hotel that's never really explored in Hazbin's first season. Maybe they'll address it in season 2, but if not, I think it's still an aspect of the characters worth considering and discussing as an audience. I mean, if we sit here all day being like, oh, I wish they would cover this topic, write fanfiction, Mally. Just write some fucking fanfiction. Goddamn. So, this guy. Oh boy, how to talk about this guy. Alright, so it's no secret that Alistair is something of the fan favorite since the initial pilot
Super Mario World music's playing in the background.
that dropped 4 years ago. He's practically designed from the same raw pop culture Lovecraftian nightmare fuel stuffed into a suave suit that made Bill Cipher so popular back in the day. Except this time the fanbase doesn't have to think of how they're gonna fuck the triangle or put him into a human suit, because this one comes pre-packaged in the Tumblr sexy man uniform. And yes, I am upset that Alistair's radio voice has been downgraded since the pilot, but he's still a delight. With all of that in mind, it's no surprise he just soared in popularity since this show came out. However, that's not to say he doesn't earn his place in the show. He definitely does. Alistair is perhaps the only consistently interesting character in this entire show. This man out here carrying my investment in the plot, I swear to God. The mystery of heaven is, at the end of the day, pretty mid. I don't think that many people would argue otherwise. The show does well to twist the heaven actually bad idea just enough that it doesn't bore me out of my mind, but it's still a narrative that we're kind of used to seeing by now. No one was going into this show shocked that Adam was a dickhead or that heaven sucked. We kind of all knew that implicitly going in. But Alistair's unexplained absence and the connection he has to Lilith's disappearance is perhaps the only consistently interesting hook remaining in season 1, which sort of bugs me, because it's pretty clear it's the only mystery allowed to sit and fester because it's designated as season 2 material, while all the narrative hooks within season 1
ended in season 1.
But right, we're getting a little too deep into the show's pacing issues, which I'm going to talk about later. Let's bring it back to the Cannibal fan favorite. Alistair is tricky to me. On one hand, I love his shtick. Obviously, just look at me, I'm fucking cringe. But on the other hand, he often slips past being a delightfully over-the-top serial killer radio host into sucking air through your teeth in a grimace kind of way. This exchange kind of highlights how terribly dull Alistair's dialogue can be.
Huh. Well, if all that's true, you'd think I'd have heard of you.
I attacked you literally last week. We've done battle like 20 times.
Well, you must have been really bad at this.
Silence! Please forgive me for attacking you and ruining your very lovely coat. Here.
Oh! Not many people have been able to take even this much off me. It must have meant quite a lot to you.
It's aiming for Bill Cipher, but hitting closer to Baby's first edgelord, and it isn't quite getting the same feral energy. It's more try-hard at times. Or maybe not try-hard enough. It's kind of leaning back on the fact that Alistair is already cool and just expecting that to continue, even if the writing isn't up to standard. But then he'll drop a curse like this, and I'm happy again. What can I say? I thought it was funny.
I am the host of the hotel. You might have heard of me from my radio broadcast.
Nope. I guess that's why Charlie called it the Hazbin Hotel. Ha ha ha.
Ha ha ha. It was actually my idea.
Ha ha ha. Well, it's not very clever.
Ha ha. Fuck you.
Okay.
But then in the next breath, he'll do this.
Let's begin. I'm gonna make you
I mean, I just, like, yeah, I get why he would be popular, but it's not, in my opinion, like, interesting.
Oh, this will be fun.
And suddenly I'm paying attention again because there's hints of something very cool here buried under the weight of fan-base expectations. For every line that falls flat or over-reliance on Alistair's implied power, there's a subtle change in form or a quick shot of him eating a deer which gets my brain spinning again. I know I said I wouldn't include things that aren't purely canon to the show, but I have to briefly explain why seeing him eat a deer had my neurons firing. I don't fully remember what his canon is now. I've heard it said he was a serial killer all the way up to a deer that was killed by a hunter. I don't know what they've settled to keep as canon. I've been actively avoiding supplementary material and this fandom, so my understanding is shaky at best, but knowing that he has a connection to deers and is a cannibal, this one little detail still...
That's why he has,
what
what do you call it, the teeth.
I like the story, I like this, okay, I like this. More of this, please. It's not in your face, but it's good. I like this. However, with that said, the things that interest me about Alistair are still implied coolness. The promise of something interesting behind his actions. And unfortunately, I can't help but think that this will just not pan out in a satisfying way. Judging by how the show has handled the conflicts and characters in Season 1, unless something drastically changes in the writing of Season 2, I don't see a world where Alistair doesn't end up being a bit of a letdown. Alistair would be infinitely less interesting if it weren't for his connections to Lilith and his petty hatred for Vox. Oh sweet Jesus, give me those shots, I need them, they're mine! Even his connections to the other overlords is used to bolster this idea that Alistair is a nuclear level threat. But a lot of this is built off other characters telling us that Alistair is interesting. Don't get me wrong, he proved himself powerful in a few instances, but that's not what I mean when I say interesting. What I mean is that every character around Alistair implies a level of depth and danger and mystery that can get an audience really hyped and theorizing, but also builds a pretty hefty expectation that I honestly don't think this show is going to deliver on. And I think that for exactly one reason. Alright guys, it's later. Alistair is, by all accounts, a monster. Everyone tells us as much. His backstory is literally being a cannibal serial killer turned sadist torturer of other sadistic torturers. He is, in most other stories, the bad guy. But Hazbin has some pretty skewered morals, and it's sort of part of the package to accept that murderous cannibals are not that special in this world. They're actually rather pleasant in a fucked up ghoul painting version of idealistic life way. I like Cannibal Town, okay? It's fun. I'm not here to tell people that they should deeply consider the implications of how bad Alistair is. I think that sort of moralizing ruins the fun of a story like this. The same way we suspend our disbelief.
You would never vote for him. Like, you're never going to vote for his success, because you know he's a bad guy.
Horrific things in an almost comedic light, mostly. Again, we'll get to it. So I feel we ought to engage with the world on that premise. I don't bring political theory to Guardians of the Galaxy, and I don't bring physics into red versus blue. You accept the premise of the world so long as it remains consistent within its own narrative. Which is why this scene sorta concerns me.
Big talk for someone who's also on a leash.
What did you say?
Nothing,
If you ever say that again, I will tear your soul apart and broadcast your screams for every other disrespectful wretch who dares to question me.
Understood?
Lovely. Good talk, my good man. Always nice to catch up.
We've seen the damage of overlords in this show. We've seen how the show depicts abusive dynamics between a debtor and a collector in this world. Yes, we'll also get to that, put a pin in it. In the Hazbin world, abuse of debtors is well established as a possibility and in many ways an inevitability. We see what this show positions as its villains in a narrative full of inherently terrible people, which means that this scene where we see Alistair scare the ever-living shit out of Husk with implied physical harm,
Does that way
and
Alistair also has black eyes?
Respect drop for a cruel ownership beneath, we get our first real moment of the show where Alistair begins to live up to his own villainous reputation within the parameters of evil laid out by the show itself. And I fucking love that. This, you see this? This is the good shit. Let Alistair be a bastard. Bet you thought I was going to tell you how terrible it is that one of our main cast is being bad, but no. My concern is that Alistair will never really live up to the character he is purported to be. Because, oh, it wouldn't do to have a fan favorite or a main character be actually evil. I understand that some people might not like that. I understand
if Alistair isn't truly evil and he ends up being a good guy, I'm gonna be pissed. Like, it would ruin the whole show.
When it comes to fiction.
No, she's absolutely right. Alistair needs to be completely evil.
Be that with a fulfilling redemption arc, or some dry friendship is magic, unexpected heel turn, or just brushing his terribleness under the rug. Maybe with some grand gesture to gloss over anything else he does, or Lord forbid, some reveal he was actually somehow, ignoring all the murder, or he's secretly a good guy. I've accepted that's likely how this story ends.
I do not want him
myself
to be a
at least
good guy.
hoping it's on the better side of redemption arcs. I like me a weird evil uncle redemption after all. But I can't lie and say there's this part of me that really wishes Alistair would be allowed to be the big bad. To be this thing that everyone else needs to overcome, some homegrown horror. Then the fanfiction writers can make a redemption arc for him instead, Godspeed. But the chances of that happening are slim to none. I also want to make a note here, seeing as there was no better place to slot it, that there's also a discussion to be had about Alistair as ace representation, but I'm not about to have that conversation, partly because he honestly didn't bother me in that aspect personally, and more pointedly, I deadass just can't figure out if I'm ace or pan. So I'm going to let people that know for a fact they're on the ace train.
Who gives a crap? I don't care if you're ace or pan. In fact, I don't even want to hear about it. You can be ace or pan. That's fine. That's you. You don't have to tell me. That's all right. Because I don't care. I hope you know that. Because I don't care.
Talk about that. As for me, I can only hope that at the very least Alistair will be a fun character, even if he never really steps into the role that all the narrative and characters around him insist he fills. The implications, here we go. You see that? You see the name of this section? We're gonna have some fun here. Oh god, let me drink some Baileys, hold on. Now that we've gone over the mechanics and how well Hazbin handles some of its actual character content, it's time for everyone's actual favorite part of media, tearing it to shreds and putting an unreasonable level of attention into the implications of an animated show about singing demons. All that to say that while I do think it's interesting to analyze media, even with an overly critical eye, I'm not a huge fan of making broad, real-world moral judgments on real people over it, but I feel I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't at least discuss some of the implications Hazbin has set up. We'll square away a few of the shorter ones before I go on. Why are there children in hell? Originally this argument cropped up a lot surrounding Hell of a Boss, where the instant rebuttal was, well, there's hellborn residents. Unfortunately, the whole child in hell debate seems to have mostly stemmed off a joke landing poorly, and people who have no understanding of the show just jumping on that poor ill-fated joke, spouting off loudly without knowing the first thing about the show's lore, which, TLDR, hell has natural born residents as well as sinners, so yeah, kids are born here. Can we all just move on now? Great, good. But I'm actually going to renege on that whole argument because, while yes, it's true that there are natural born residents of hell, it's equally true that there's sinner children. We even see one explicitly in Hazbin, the sparing of which leads to Vaggy's fall from heaven because, remember, demons are given an exemption from extermination, which means that this kid has to be a sinner. So yes, there are children in hell, and that's fine from a narrative standpoint. Going off mostly real-world religious doctrine, basically all of them include hell or limbo states for children. Kids aren't given a pass the majority of the time, and depending on which book you subscribe to, kids can get yeeted into the pit if their parents mess up or don't baptize them correctly. So this complaint seems less rooted in any actual protest of narrative reasoning, and more from a stance of I don't like this idea, which, fair enough. Most rational people don't like the idea of children in hell. But yeah, kids don't get a pass in the real world, and so they don't really need to get a pass here either. Take it up with God or something. In fact, that's an argument Charlie well could make to heaven, but I doubt she will because it airs far too close to actual religious debates, and this show, despite being all about sinners and hell,
children did get a pass from God. Numbnuts. Children that died were given an exemption to go to heaven as pure beings. Even the ones that he killed. Like with the angels killed, like during Egypt. Baptized or not, you have a safe sanctity of purity.
steps a lot of the real world debates about religion, which is why it's sort of pointless to make an argument for or against Hazbin based on real world doctrine, especially seeing as Hazbin is a hodgepodge of different pop culture depictions of hell and heaven rather than strictly adhering to any one particular scripture. In a similar vein, our second frequent complaint is that there's too many minorities and LGBT characters depicted in hell, so that must mean the creators are bigots. And ignoring how the show is also routinely accused of not having enough representation or not representing it in the right way, which is very much a damn
I don't give a
don't
balls.
Situation. Once again, if I'm to engage in this argument in good faith, I'm more or less in the unfortunate position of reminding everyone that, historically speaking, hell is exactly where my fellow queer babies would be sent. I don't like it either, but here we are. So I don't think it's an argument against logic, so the implication is that they're bigots, which I think is a little bit silly again, because, like, they're our characters. They're our main, our main cast is full of LGBT people. The people we root for. Honestly, I struggle to put into words how annoying this critique is. It's like, I'm sorry, I guess we'll just make all the cast straight again. I'm so happy. Yay. What? To be honest, I think arguments like these are grasping for a moral hill to stand on or give some sort of greater relevance to people's dislike of a cartoon, which, weird move, but okay. And yes, I saw the discourse around Peter being a white dude. And no, I'm not going to start talking about the historical whitening of religious figures within the Western zeitgeist. The fact that thought even crossed my mind while thinking about this script is thoroughly exhausting. At the end of the day, Hazbin is set in a pop culture understanding of hell and heaven, and it works off the inherent narrative tied to those concepts rather than actually referring back to the Bible. And I should stop here and say that it's fine if you hate the show, either because of its content or for other personal reasons. There's no reason to make a moral argument about it, nor do you need to morally justify your hatred of a show. Sometimes, the vibes are just rank, and that's okay.
That is the best part of this video. If you hate the show, you have every reason to hate the show. If you like the show, you have every reason to like the show.
But needlessly trying to find gotchas that prove the show is secretly anti-queer or hates kids or is not doing the Bible character justice. Works. I just kind of find that argument difficult to engage with, especially when it can so quickly spiral into discussions of real-world religious debates. Case in point, this script. And you can probably hear how tired I am when I tell you that I didn't watch the Singing Demon show to get into a theology argument. Because as soon as you start whipping out the...
I did. I watched the Singing Demons show to get in a theology argument. That's me. That's my camp.
The why is X in hell argument, the immediate response to that is a tired sort of, I regret to inform you, but wearing mixed fabrics can get you sent to hell depending on which doctrine you follow, so we're all pretty much going to hell.
I don't believe that nonsense. We don't believe... The Old Testament was funky.
Replies, and that just
that's why we have the New Testament.
These unpleasant real-world discussions that a lot of us just aren't looking to get into in our casual media consumption. If you want to engage with the media on that,
I'm be honest, I like the Old Testament more,
go
but
ahead. As far as I can tell, there's no wrong way
still
to
funky.
engage with a piece of media. But don't be surprised when a lot of people, myself included, won't want to discuss it through any real-world religious lens with you. It sort of bleeds the fun out of the show in a sense. It reminds me of how upsetting a lot of theology and fundamental doctrine is, and I've had enough of that in my day-to-day life. I don't need it in my musical gay devil show. There'll surely be other videos that engage with the show in that way.
I love talking about it. I could talk about it all day.
Escapism is valid, and I'm escaping from this conversation right out the window. As such, I'm going to stop talking about weird arguments around the show and talk about the implication that Hazbin actually makes within its own framework of its own world building. Because there's definitely some discussions to have about how Hazbin mishandles sensitive material without needing to resort to whipping out the actual Bible. Alright, time to talk about the bomb beneath the table. That is to say, yeah, we're talking about this now. Discussing depictions of abuse, and especially essay in media, is really tricky. Because on one hand, intent plays a huge role in these things. Intent and depiction in media...
I disagree. It is, unfortunately, something that happens more often than not. And bringing light to it, wrong or not wrongly or rightly, is a way of bringing the light to it. And it sucks, and people do it all the time. And it doesn't matter if you're a guy or a girl, it happens. It's bad. People talk about it, you know, obviously people talk about it, you know, people in my support group talk about it. It's something people gotta deal with in their own way. And unfortunately, it's something that should be brought up more often. And it's not tricky to deal with. You gotta have the balls to say it.
It's important to consider when talking about these topics. So let's start with physical, non-sexual abuse, because uncomfortable as it is to say, it is the easier of the two to discuss and more commonly depicted in a childish or harmless light. When we watch some shows, especially in cartoon,
but I'm sure this woman has no idea
role in deciding how seriously
what it has
take
to do with it.
Violence. Because technically speaking, in the real world, character interactions like this would be considered assault or abuse. But we don't typically interpret it that way while watching because of the same reason we suspend our disbelief for other outlandish elements in the media. It's fiction, it's fantasy, and we engage with it on that level. In the real world, a punch like that could do some serious damage. It could lead to an actual death in extreme situations, and even in less extreme situations, it can cause lingering emotional and physical damage that's nothing to scoff at. But in anime land, it's a 1 second.
If you punch someone and it scars them emotionally and physically, maybe physically, Okay. But it scars them emotionally. They can never get over it. You've lost. You've lost the human society. Okay? You've lost what do you call it? Darwinism. It's over. Natural selection has not chose you to survive. Get out. You're done. If someone punches you and you're like, I can't handle it, you're done. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to see you. It's over. You have no idea what real life is. You have no idea what life is.
Can fix. It's not real. There's no lasting damage. Consider scenes like these, for example. None of these moments are depicting abuse or assault. Not in their world, at least. In the same way that in kids' shows, extreme violence tends to do no damage, there's a set expectation of their individual universe's lore and tone. Now, some people think it's very big brain to point out that a tsundere is actually massively violent. And yes, a real-world version of a tsundere would be abusive. Just like a real-world version of Batman would fail, and a real-world version of Frozen would have killed thousands upon thousands of living things. But they're not real. They're fiction. And I honestly find people that get up in arms about this kind of thing to be exhausting. They know it's not intended to
I don't like
take
any
the same
form of
gravitas
violence
as the
in
real
shows.
world is, and we know it too. In essence, they're taking something not meant to be considered in a literal real-world lens and purposefully viewing it through that lens to make a moral judgment. Intent and depiction matters in these situations. When we move on to discussions of sexual themes, and especially sexually violent themes, the conversation changes a bit. On the one hand, some of the same rules still apply. There's still definitely a long-standing trope of male sexual violence, in particular being used as a cheap gag, and this is normally where I'd insert some examples, but when I thought about them, it actually made me super uncomfortable. For those who know, the scene that came to mind for me was the Simpsons Homer bear suit bit, which I'm choosing not to show because no matter how much I love The Simpsons, that scene makes me squirm, which I think is almost a perfect example as to why more and more of this trope is getting phased out. In 2024, it's almost a surprise to see any media with an ounce of self-respect pulling the dropping the soap gag. Remember this. This will be important later. This sentence I just said will be important later. But with that said, it's still worth noting that it is intended as a joke, and these scenes don't have any lasting consequences on their characters. Much like how the violence from a tsundere doesn't have the same lasting implications and effects of a real-life punch. But that's not to say you have to like these things. Again, I could not even bring myself to get the clip for an example. I am literally an example of someone who doesn't like SA for jokes. But I can acknowledge that it is not meant to be taken seriously. And for a bit of a more in-depth
if you can't look at an animated or fictional sexual assault and realize the moral standard that they're trying to teach, you can get cringed up, you can get uncomfortable. If you can't look at it, you have a problem. And you gotta get help. Because guess what? That's real life. Okay? That's what happens in the real world. And as soon as you accept that, you'll be better off. Because real life is cruel, vicious, and unhappy.
Conversation about this topic, I would suggest you go and have a look at this video. It is on screen, it will be in the links. It goes a lot into the trope of male sexual abuse, and it's just, again, I can't get into it too much. It's a very good video. It's a good explanation of why this isn't funny and why it's slowly being phased out and why people thought it was funny in the first place. It's a good video. Go and watch it. Again, add it to your list. So that's when media isn't taking it seriously and it's just a joke. What about when the media does take it seriously? Or purports to take it seriously? Well, that's where the discussion of when it is and is not ethical to showcase visual depictions of SA and non-con come in. This is another one of those areas that's highly subjective and personal to...
I think it's always ethical. It's always ethical to to show how bad it is. If you're showing it in a good light, not ethical. You can show SA in a bad light all day, every day, because guess what? It gets the word out there. No matter how bad it makes people feel uncomfortable, you're doing the right thing.
Each individual. Some can't stand even the presence or implication of SA in media, while others are okay with it being shown outright on screen. Wherever you fall on that spectrum is honestly fine. There's no one-size-fits-all answer for morality of depicting awful things in media. But regardless of where you fall, there's still the matter of ethical and artistic framing. A lot of people subscribe to the notion that it should never be visually depicted, or should only be implied or otherwise depicted through metaphor or suggestion, but never never outright addressed. And while that's a fine personal stance to hold, some people assert that any media doing otherwise is inherently fetishistic or exploitative in nature, or almost worse, an endorsement of sorts, which I think is a far
There
less
should be
fair
no
stance to
endorsement
hold.
of it.
Let me bring you an example. Belladonna of Sadness is a 1973 Japanese adult animated art film, and please, God bear with me, I promise this relates to Hazbin, I swear it does. This is a film that focuses almost exclusively on female sexuality and abuse. It's a story that graphically and repeatedly depicts unpleasant encounters that I cannot say lest Daddy YouTube take me over the knee. See, some people would consider that a essay joke, other people would consider it a child abuse joke. Take your pick. Either way, dark subject material for a joke.
I don't consider it either.
Sadness approaches this topic with a visceral visual display that is as abstract as it is obscene in nature. I can't show you basically any of these scenes because they're borderline pornographic in nature, or maybe they just are pornographic. Honestly, the line is so thin, it is hard to tell. But they do tell a story of the harrowing events a survivor undergoes and how it affects her both physically, emotionally, and mentally. And the reason I highlight Belladonna of Sadness specifically is because Poison has nothing on it. When episode 4 came out and the musical number Poison specifically started doing the rounds, there was a bit of a stir over the way they depicted Angel's situation. Twitter did what Twitter does, and there were a few people claiming that the fact the music number was bombastic and beautifully animated, that it was meant to glorify the abuse in the SA. I assume the logic here is that pretty art inherently means glamorization, and the reason I bring up Belladonna is because it's almost a perfect direct counterclaim to that. Things that are beautiful are not inherently good or desirable. In fact, that's quite plainly stated in Belladonna itself.
I do like that. I do like what she's saying here.
Beauty, having expected her hatred and quote-unquote evil to manifest into something ugly and vile. The devil that offers her that evil power asks her, who says that anger and hatred are ugly? All that to say, something beautiful does not inherently mean it's something good, and something bad does not inherently have to be ugly. Pretending otherwise is almost preschooler logic. It throws us right back to when all of our villains were like the hag. We've moved past this, right? Please. In Angel's song, he depicts his own situation and abuse in a way that makes the most sense to him. We see it in his eyes, his style, and to a certain extent, his own delusions as he tries to drag some sense of agency from a situation that he's been trapped within, and even wrongly places blame onto himself.
Most people need to accept that.
This is his vent art. Let the boy express himself. Which finally brings us to the core question all this preamble has been building to. Does the show glamorize Valentino's abuse and essay of Angel? No. Despite what Twitter might say, it really doesn't. The scene depicting Angel's experiences are either deeply unsettling and upsetting, or they're viewed from Angel's version of events where he actively tries to lie to himself that he's either in control or...
People that go and live on Twitter are morons. We've learned this. Don't you know that?
Or to blame for what has happened. I don't think this show glamorizes any of the abuse that Angel undergoes, no matter how well animated it is. But you know what the show does make light of? Everyone else. Yeah, talk about tonal whiplash. Remember when I said this earlier? 2024, it's almost a surprise to see any media with an ounce of self-respect dropping the soap gag. Remember this. This will be important later. This sentence I just said will be important later. Well, here we are. In 2024, and a show that spends a good chunk of its runtime explicitly exploring and condemning the abusive power dynamics of the sex industry is making a joke like this.
Why would we have sex?
Because I'm having sex with everyone here!
What the fuck? Putting this immediately next to this, or even having it in the same show as this, it's a choice. It's definitely a choice.
I mean,
I have to assume that this is on purpose, and the writers have the world's most...
One's a serious tone, and the other one's a joke. I didn't see this. Like, I don't care. So what?
Public punishment kink, because... What? What? Like, I'm reading, I have a script in front of me and I'm still somehow lost for words. What are they doing? The idea that the show can take Angel's experiences so seriously and put the effort into at least attempting to portray his situation in a sympathetic and respectful light, then can in the same breath continue to make jokes about SA and abuse is, well, it's a lot. Honestly, just talking about the disconnect between these two things makes me extremely frustrated, because I want to give the writers and the showrunners the benefit of the doubt in any mishandling of the topics of SA being down to the tricky nature of putting any depiction of these things to screen. But
no, one's funny, one's just a joke.
Assault for laughs, and it's hard not to walk away from that feeling distinctly dirty or ridiculed. I just, after all that, I'm sitting here looking at Hazbin Hotel like an exhausted parent telling their shithead kid to stop shoving sparklers into their pants. And just like that tired parent, I'm done trying. Get third-degree burns for all I care. I'm going to the liquor cabinet. Hazbin Hotel drives me sort of nuts, because I can see the vision. I can see the bones of an interesting story with interesting characters here, but sweet Jesus, this thing just cannot breathe. And what little time it does have to try and take some gasping breaths is just poorly divvied up. On the face of it, Hazbin has an extremely outstanding one-sentence pitch. What if sinners tried to redeem themselves to get into heaven? Which is sort of a shame that so little of this show actually works within that premise. Even in the beginning of the first episode, it more or less shows its hand with one line. And then it continues to double down when Adam outright states himself that they can't let them quote-unquote catch on. So already the focus of the show has almost completely abandoned the core question in favor of inner politics of heaven and hell and the various mysteries dotted about the place. It's a shame, but a lot of this can be linked back to the overarching problem that Hazbin has, which is pacing. Its need to rush through everything in one season as fast as possible is exhausting. Even the mysteries in this show don't get time to breathe. In episode 1, we're told the big mystery is who and how an angel was killed. By episode 3, we're then directly told that it's this character we've never met before, and then continue to not see until the penultimate episode, and it doesn't matter that Camilla's design is the coolest thing since sliced bread, this is just bad time management. Hazbin's first season is in the uncomfortable position of only having 8 episodes to try and cover a lot of ground, and it spends most of that time sprinting for a season 2 and tripping over every uneven patch of pavement and twig to the point that slasher movie chicks are offering it a hand up. I know it sucks, but there's a reason common advice for writers is to kill your babies. I understand it doesn't feel great when you have a bombastic world with big ideas and equally big characters, then you're handed an 8-episode run and told to try and cram it all in there. I get that, but you have to adapt at some point. Realistically, your choices at that point are to rework the narrative to better fit the time you have at the cost of removing characters or plot points you really wish to keep, or having the whole work suffer for it instead. Hazbin is a perfect example of stubbornly sticking to the latter, and the whole suffers for it. I don't think the argument that Hazbin only had a limited amount of time and so of course it was doomed from the start is fair. We've seen shows recently that work within a similar or even more limited scope that manage to get a more cohesive
but Castlevania is really good.
However, I will say this, Hazbin really does not have enough time. And yes, I know I just disparaged this argument,
League
but
of
I'm not
Legends
saying
show is
this
good
as a means
too.
to defend its shortcomings, more so as a means of empathizing with the tough place the show found itself in. Just because I can see how we got the product we did, faults and all, it doesn't magically make those faults not exist. I'm not a fan of this trend in original streaming content towards less episodes and less time. Even if they drown all their babies, there's just some things that can't be worked around, and kneecapping our media by forcing them into these cramped runtimes is a troubling trend I'd love to see end. I don't think it's reasonable to call something a season when it barely has the runtime of a feature-length film. Sorry, Castlevania, I love you, but you were clearly meant to be a movie, and get the fuck off my screen, Infinite. So fucking help me God.
That's so funny.
Another argument one might make is that season 1 was setting up season 2, so it had to take a few awkward losses for the good of future seasons. However, that excuse also doesn't really fly with me for a multitude of reasons, and best believe I'm about to make a thing of it. Welcome to my content, I am annoying. The argument that Hazbin had to suffer in order to set up a second season and lay the groundwork
I don't want to
so
hear
it couldn't be good on its own
welcome
merits
to my
is
content.
the same excuse being made for something
I'm
like
already
Rebel
sitting
Moon,
here.
which I doubt a lot of my audience has seen because by God I wouldn't have seen it either had I not gone home to hang out with my family over Christmas. Rebel Moon is a movie that rests on the idea that it's setting up a sprawling multi-movie franchise, and it's a massive pile of shit, with similar pacing and character issues as Hazbin, but so much worse. Like, I cannot express to you in this short segment how bad that pile of Frankenstein sci-fi drivel is, and I feel bad for Hazbin to even utter Rebel Moon's name in the same video as it, but it's a very recent and perfect example of this mentality delivering on shitty products. For a more long-running example of sacrificing quality for a potential future, I need only gesture vaguely at the whole mess that is DC's fumbling attempts to be Marvel. My point is, you can't defend poor execution for what we do have for the promise of something we might get later. Even movies responsible for fantastic trilogies movies have to stand on their own 2 feet. Star Wars, The Godfather, yes, because fuck you, I bring it up in every video.
I love The
Train to Dragon
Godfather.
are all perfect examples
Oh,
of this.
jeez.
Each of these trilogies, planned or happy accident, have self-contained, cohesive first movies that, if the rest of the trilogy never came to pass, would still stand on their own merits. You might think that's a little unfair, given those are movies and not seasons of
Lord
shows,
Rings.
and okay, I hear you, and I raise you Castlevania, which only had a staggering 4 episodes to Hazbin's 8, and
it was
managed to get
great.
across better characterization, narrative motivation, and action to an audience while serving the express purpose
It's
of
phenomenal.
setting up a second season. And yes, like I said, it probably should have been a movie, but it's packaged and delivered as season 1, so fuck you, that's what I'm going to refer to it as. At the end of the day, I think a lot of people really wanted to like this show, and some of those people probably just like making art and their own OCs for the aesthetic and concept far more than what we've actually been given so far. That, or they just really like Hell of a Boss even if Hazbin isn't hitting the right spot. And granted, there's no denying the popularity of it. So while I might not have been able to enjoy this first season that much, clearly plenty of people did, and honestly, good for them. Enjoying things is pretty much always a positive, so if you're one of those people, don't listen to losers like me or the 5 billion other YouTuber talky people, just enjoy your thing. As for me, I am gonna tune into season 2, of course. Like, at the end of the day, for as much as season 1 failed to invigorate me,
Yeah, there's no
also
way
one
I'm
of those
not gonna
crazy
watch
people
season 2.
that's curious to see how this all pans out, both from the perspective of what Hazbin means for the indie animation community, and as someone that just really, really likes Husk. Like, look at it, look at my precious over-designed Bab, of course I love him. Yeah, the takeaway from this video is simply Husk is the best character, and no, you won't convince me otherwise.
Oh, we have an actual animation here.
Oh, you're done. Welcome back.
Malware! You'll never guess who just called me.
I recognize that. Alright. Let's go on. We have another Hazbin Hotel video.